pitchfork was still in her hand when Mei Lin Zhao found him. Hay dust hung gold in the early light slanting through the barn's east wall, and there, buried in the loose pile she had meant to turn before sunup, lay a man she had never seen in her life. Boots crusted with red Nebraska mud, a jaw shadowed dark with 3 or 4 days of neglect, one arm flung over his face like he expected the world to hit him and wanted to be ready for it. She should have screamed. She should have run for the shotgun above the mantel and put the barrel to his throat before he woke. Instead, she stood there, with the pitchfork's tines an inch from his ribs, and she thought about the fact that her nearest neighbor was 4 miles east, and that the last man to sleep uninvited on her land had been sent by the bank. "You are on my property," she said, and her voice did not shake, though something under her ribs did. He came awake the way men who have slept rough always do, all at once, no soft transition, his hand halfway to a gun that was not on his hip before his eyes found her face, and the pitchfork, and the particular stillness of a woman who has already decided what she will do if he moves wrong. "I mean you no harm, ma'am." He held both hands up, slow, palms out. "I'll be gone before you've had your coffee." Widowed 8 months now, and Mei Lin Zhao had grown used to the particular arithmetic of a woman alone on 80 acres in the Nebraska Territory. The neighbors who came by too often with offers to buy her land cheap and take the trouble off her hands. The ones who came by not often enough, because a Chinese widow running cattle without a husband was a fact some of Kestrel Hollow preferred not to look at directly. She had not expected a stranger sleeping in her hay, and she liked surprises about as much as she liked debt. "Who are you?" she said, "and why is my barn where you chose to do your sleeping?" "Name's Silas Boone." He sat up slow, wincing at something in his side he did not explain. "I was riding for Cheyenne when my horse threw a shoe 2 days back, and I've been walking since. Saw your barn last night and figured a roof was a roof." "You figured wrong. This roof belongs to somebody." "Yes, ma'am. I gathered that when I saw the fork." There was something in the dry flatness of it that almost made her want to laugh, and she did not like that she wanted to, so she kept the pitchfork level and studied him instead. Not young, somewhere past 30, she guessed, with the kind of weathering that came from years outdoors rather than age alone. His shirt had been good once. Now it hung off a frame that had clearly not eaten well in some time, and when he shifted his weight to stand, she saw him catch his breath against the pain in his side again, quick and controlled, the wince of a man used to hiding what hurt. "You're hurt," she said. It was not a question. "I've had worse." "That is not an answer to what I asked." He looked at her then, really looked, the way she noticed men rarely did, not cataloging what she was, but simply seeing her. And something in his face shifted, some calculation resolving. "Cracked a rib coming off the horse when it threw the shoe. It'll mend." She should have told him to walk on. Kestrel Hollow was 1.5 miles down the road, and a man with a cracked rib and empty pockets could find his own way to whatever charity the town offered a stranger, which she suspected was not much. But the drought that summer had already taken 2 of her hands. Men who found better wages on outfits with more water and less risk, and she had 40 head of cattle and 80 acres and 1 pair of hands to do work that wanted 4. Therefore, before she had entirely decided to, she found herself lowering the pitchfork. "There's a wash basin behind the house," she said, and I imagine you could eat." "I don't want charity, ma'am." "Good," she said, "because I was not offering any. Come inside. We'll talk terms." The cabin was small. 2 rooms and a loft her husband Joseph had built with his own hands the summer before he died of a fever that took him in 4 days flat, too fast for the doctor from Ogallala to reach them in time. She had kept everything the way he left it, mostly, except the things that reminded her too sharply, which she had put away in a trunk she did not open. Silas Boone stood in the doorway, like a man unsure whether he had permission to take up the space, and she gestured him toward the table without ceremony. "Sit," she said. "You look like you might fall down otherwise." She set bread in front of him, and the last of the ham she had been saving, and watched him eat with the careful restraint of a man who had learned not to eat too fast, even when he was starving, because a stomach unused to food would punish him for it. That restraint told her something. A man who had been hungry before and knew the rules of it. "What were you doing out here alone with a horse gone lame?" she asked. "Riding for Cheyenne with nothing but the clothes on your back?" "Looking for work. Lost my position on a spread outside Laramie when the outfit sold to new owners who brought their own men." "And before Laramie?" Something closed in his face, brief but unmistakable. "Does it matter?" "It might," she said, "given you're eating my ham at my table." He set down the bread. "I was a foreman on a ranch in Texas, left under circumstances I'd rather not discuss with a woman I met 4 hours ago holding a pitchfork to my chest." "That is fair," she said, though she noted the evasion the way she noted everything, filed for later. "I have 40 head and 80 acres, and no one to help me work either. My last 2 hands left for the Hendricks spread 3 weeks back when they heard I might not make it through winter without selling. You can sleep in the barn, or you can sleep on the floor in here if the barn does not suit a cracked rib, and I will feed you, and in exchange you will work until your rib mends and you can ride on. You don't know me. I know you didn't run when I had a pitchfork on you, and you didn't lie about the rib once I asked straight. That is more than I know about most men in this territory." She met his eyes, steady. "I am not asking you to stay forever, Mr. Boone. I am asking you to earn your keep while you're here, and be gone when you're able." He was quiet a long moment, and she watched him arrive at whatever decision he was making, the way she imagined he arrived at most things, slow and thorough and unwilling to be rushed by another person's patience. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said finally, "and ask for nothing but the food." "You'll sleep in the cabin," she said, surprising herself as much as him. "That loft has not been used since my husband died, and there's no sense in a man with a cracked rib sleeping on hay when there's a proper bed going to waste. I am not asking you twice, Mr. Boone. Take the loft or take the road." He took the loft. That was the moment everything changed, though neither of them would have named it so plainly. It was only a meal and a roof and a bargain struck between 2 people who had nothing but their own judgment to go on. But something had shifted in the small cabin's quiet, and Maylin would think of that moment often in the weeks that followed, long after the sun went down over land that was, for the first time in 8 months, not entirely hers to carry alone. The days that followed took on a shape neither of them had planned for. Silas rose before her, which she had not expected, and had the stock fed and the water hauled before she came out to find him already working the north fence line with the particular economy of a man who had done this kind of labor his whole life. He did not speak much. When he did, it was direct, without the empty flourishes some men use to fill silence they did not know how to sit inside. She found she preferred it. 8 months of solitude had made her impatient with idle talk. "You favor your left side," she said on his third morning, watching him lift a fence post with a hitch in his movement he thought he was hiding well. "Rib," he said. "Told you it'd mend. Mending faster if you don't lift posts like that. Man's got to work for his supper." "Man's got to work for his supper without breaking himself worse in the process," she said. "There is a difference between earning your keep and being foolish about it." He looked at her sideways, something almost like amusement in it. "You always this particular about how a man does his labor?" "I am particular about everything, Mr. Boone. It is how I have kept this ranch running 8 months without a husband and without the bank taking it from under me, though God knows they've tried." That drew something out of him she had not seen yet, a short huff of breath that might have been the beginning of a laugh he did not let finish. "I believe that," he said. "I believe that entirely." The town of Kestrel Hollow did not take long to notice. May Lynn rode in on a Thursday for supplies and found Ruth Calloway, who ran the mercantile with her husband and a tongue sharper than any blade in the county, waiting with a question dressed up as concern. "Heard you've got a man staying out at your place," Ruth said, weighing out flour with a precision that did not match the pointed look in her eye. "A drifter, they're saying. Sleeping in your house." "He's working my land in exchange for food and a roof," May Lynn said. "Same as any hand I might hire, except this one asks for less." "Folks talk, May Lynn." "Folks have talked about me since the day I married Joseph and did not stop when he died. I have made my peace with folks talking." She counted out coin for the flour, steady. "I would rather have help getting my cattle through this drought than worry over what Kestrel Hollow whispers about how I get it." But the whispering was not the only threat gathering that summer, and May Lynn knew it even as she rode home with her supplies, because the drought that had already cost her 2 hands was not letting up, and the creek that fed her north pasture had dropped low enough to show rock that had not seen daylight in a decade. Worse than the drought was the man circling her land with an interest that had nothing to do with weather. Everett Marsh owned the bank in Kestrel Hollow and half the paper on every struggling outfit within 20 miles, and he had made May Lynn 2 offers for her land since Joseph's death, both low, both delivered with a politeness that had never once fooled her about what sat underneath it. She found him waiting at her gate 3 days after the mercantile, his buggy pulled up neat as a church pew, his smile arranged like it cost him nothing. "Mrs. Zhao?" He tipped his hat. "I understand you've taken on help." "I have taken on a hand, same as any rancher does when they're short." "A drifter. No references from what I hear." Marsh's eyes moved past her toward the barn, where Silas was working the fence line, and something in his gaze sharpened. "A woman alone with a stranger of unknown character? It concerns the town, Mrs. Zhao. It concerns me." "My concerns are my own to manage, Mr. Marsh, and I have managed them without your help since Joseph died. I do not see why they should become yours now." "The bank holds paper on this land, as you well know. Should anything happen to you, should the ranch fall into disorder for want of proper oversight, that paper becomes very relevant very quickly." He smiled again, the same practiced warmth. "I only want what's best for you. My last offer still stands. Generous, given the state of this drought." "Your offer was low the first time, and I imagine it has not improved with repetition." She kept her voice even, though her hands had curled at her sides. "I will make this payment on time, same as I have every month since Joseph died, and you will have no cause to concern yourself with my land or my help." Marcia's smile did not waver, but something behind it went cold and calculating in a way that made the hair on her arms rise. "I do hope that's true, Mrs. Al. Droughts have a way of finding the weak point in any arrangement." He tipped his hat again and turned his buggy back toward town, and Maylin stood at her gate a long moment after he was gone, feeling the particular chill of a threat delivered in the politest possible language. Silas had come up beside her without her noticing, close enough that she startled at his voice. "Bank man?" "Everett Marsh. He has wanted this land since before Joseph passed, and he has grown less patient about waiting for it." She turned to find Silas watching Marsh's buggy disappear down the road with an expression she had not seen on him before, flat and assessing in a way that reminded her, briefly and uncomfortably, that she still knew almost nothing true about where he had come from. "Men like that don't stop asking politely forever," Silas said. "No," she agreed. "They generally do not." That night, over a meal of beans and the last of the summer squash, Silas told her something he had not offered before, unprompted, his eyes fixed on the table rather than on her. "I left Texas because of a man like Marsh. Rancher named Holt bought up half the paper in the county I was working, squeezed out every outfit smaller than his own. I was fool enough to speak against him at a cattlemen's meeting, and word got back to him fast." His jaw tightened. "He made sure I couldn't find work in 3 counties after that. That's the circumstance I didn't want to discuss." "That's why you were riding for Cheyenne with nothing." "That's why." He looked up at her then, something raw in it he had kept carefully hidden until now. "I've watched men like Marsh ruin better people than either of us for the sake of land they didn't need and money they'd never spend. I know how that story usually ends for the small outfit." "This is not Texas," Maylin said, "and I am not some rancher who will be squeezed quiet. I have kept this land through a husband's death and a drought and 8 months of men thinking a widow alone is an invitation. I do not intend to let Everett Marsh be the one who finally takes it." Something shifted in his face, approval or admiration or something with no easy name, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence between them carrying more than either was ready to say aloud. She would think about that silence later, the way it had not felt empty at all. The drought worsened through the following weeks, the creek dropping further, the grass in the north pasture browning past any hope of recovery, and Maylin watched her herd grow leaner with a worry she did not let show on her face where Silas could see it. But worse than the drought was what came after, on a night in late July, when she woke to the smell of smoke thick enough to choke on, and the orange flicker of firelight through her window that had no business being there. The grain store was burning. She was out the door before she had fully understood what she was seeing, Silas already ahead of her, both of them running for the small structure where she kept the winter feed that would mean the difference between her herd surviving the coming cold or starving through it. The fire had caught fast, dry summer wood, feeding it eager and bright, and Silas was already hauling water from the trough before she reached him, his cracked rib forgotten in the urgency of it. "Buckets!" she shouted, already moving toward the well. "There's a line of them by the barn door." They worked in a rhythm that needed no discussion, her filling, him throwing, the fire fighting back against every bucket with a hunger that made her chest tight with fear for everything that store represented. But therefore, in the chaos of it, she caught sight of something at the edge of the firelight that stopped the breath in her throat. A man, mounted, watching from the tree line at the property's edge, not moving to help, simply watching, the way a man watches something he has caused and wants to see finished. "Silas!" she called, pointing. "There, by the trees!" He turned, and the rider wheeled his horse and vanished into the dark, before either of them could reach for a gun or a name. But Mei Lin had seen enough in the brief moment of firelight to know the shape of that horse, the particular gray coat that belonged to one of Everett Marsh's men. They got the fire out before it reached the main structure, though the loss of grain would cost her dear come winter. And Mei Lin stood in the smoking wreckage afterward with her hands blistered and her nightdress streaked black, shaking not from cold, but from a fury that had been building in her for months and had finally found its target. "That was Marsh's man," she said. "I know that horse." "I know it too," Silas said grimly. "Question is what we do about a fire we can't prove he set." "We can't prove it tonight," Mei Lin said, "but I intend to find a way, because I will not let that man burn me out of land I have bled to keep." The morally costly choice came 2 days later, when Mei Lin rode into Kestrel Hollow and paid a visit to Sheriff Otis Pruitt, a man whose loyalty to Everett Marsh's bank was well known, and whose help she did not expect to receive honestly. She told him what she had seen, the gray horse, the rider watching from the trees, and watched his face arrange itself into practiced sympathy that did not reach his eyes. "A gray horse could belong to a dozen men in this county, Mrs. Jow," Pruitt said. "I can't act on a color in the dark." "I did not expect you could," she said, and something in her tone made him look up sharply. "I only wanted it said aloud, Sheriff, so that when the next thing happens, you cannot claim you were never warned." She left his office knowing she had gained nothing official, but she had done something else, something she needed for her own resolve. She had made her suspicion a matter of record, spoken where it could not later be denied. That evening, back at the ranch, she found Silas mending the fence Marsh's fire had scorched along its edge, and she stood watching him a long moment before she spoke what had been sitting heavy in her chest since the fire. "I could lose this land," she said. "Truly lose it. Not to the drought. To him." Silas set down his tools and looked at her with an intensity that made her want to look away, and made her unable to. "You won't lose it," he said. "Not while I'm standing on it." "You don't owe me that, Silas. You've paid your keep twice over already." "I'm not doing it because I owe you," he said, and his voice had gone low and rough in a way she had not heard from him before. "I'm doing it because I have watched you hold this place together with nothing but stubbornness and good sense for 8 months. And I will be damned if I let a man like Marsh take it out from under you while I've got 2 working hands and 1 mended rib." The confession, when it landed, was not made of poetry. It was made of the way he said damned, like it cost him something to say aloud, and the way he did not look away from her when he said it. And Mei Lin understood, standing in the scorched evening light, that whatever this had become between them, it was no longer simply an arrangement of food for labor. "Silas," her voice was quieter than she meant it, "you said you'd sleep in the barn and ask for nothing." "I remember what I said." He took 1 step closer, close enough that she could see the exact color of his eyes in the fading light, gray shot through with something warmer. "I was wrong to think that's all I'd want." She did not step back. That was its own kind of answer, and they both knew it, standing there in the ruin of a fire that had tried to take everything from her, and had instead, somehow, given her this. But the cost of that closeness arrived faster than either of them expected. 3 nights later, Mei Lin woke to hoofbeats in the yard, more than one rider, moving with the deliberate quiet of men who did not want to be heard until it was too late to matter. She was at the window before Silas reached the loft ladder, and what she saw in the moonlight turned her blood to ice. 4 riders, and at their front, unmistakable even in the dark, Everett Marsh himself, no longer hiding behind polite offers and patient smiles. "Mrs. Zhao," Marsh called, his voice carrying flat across the yard, "I think it's time we settled this matter properly." "There is nothing to settle," Mei Lin called back through the door, her hand tight around the shotgun she had pulled from above the mantel. "My payment is not due for another 11 days, and you have no business on my land at this hour." "Your payment," Marsh said, "assumes there is still a ranch left to pay for. I've had a survey done, Mrs. Zhao. Your northern boundary sits 80 yards inside land the railroad has already claimed for its right-of-way. You're squatting on federal ground, and you don't even know it. I could have you removed within the week, or you could sign the land over to me tonight and walk away with something in your pocket instead of nothing at all." It was a lie built to sound like law, and Mei Lin knew it the moment he spoke it, because Joseph had walked that boundary with the county surveyor himself the year they claimed it, and she still had the paper to prove it, filed properly in Ogallala. But she also knew that 4 armed men in her yard at midnight did not care much for paper, and this was the moment that would decide everything. "Silas," she said quietly, not taking her eyes from the window, "the deed box, under the floorboard by the hearth. Bring it." She stepped out onto the porch alone, shotgun steady in her hands, and faced Everett Marsh across 30 feet of moonlit yard with a calm she did not entirely feel, but refused to let him see otherwise. "You are lying about that survey, Mr. Marsh," she said, "and you know it, because my husband walked that line with the county surveyor in 1871 and filed the claim proper in Ogallala. I have the paper to prove it, and I imagine a judge would take considerable interest in a banker who tries to steal land with a lie about federal ground." "Papers can be lost, Mrs. Zhao. Fires happen." Something ugly flickered across his face in the moonlight. "As you've recently learned." "That fire was you," she said, and it was not a question. "Your man on the gray horse, watching my grain burn from the tree line. I told the sheriff as much, and now I am telling you, in front of 3 witnesses you brought yourself, that if anything else happens to this land, there will be no question left about who is responsible." Silas came out onto the porch behind her then, the deed box in his hands, and set it down on the rail beside her without a word, his presence a wall at her back that asked nothing and gave everything. One of Marsh's riders shifted uneasily in his saddle, and Mei Lin caught the look that passed between 2 of the 4 men, the particular discomfort of hired hands realizing the job had grown larger and uglier than they had signed on for. "You brought 4 men to threaten a widow in her own yard," Mei Lin said, raising her voice enough to carry to all of them. "I wonder how many of you knew that was the job when you took his coin. I wonder how many of you want your names attached to it once the sheriff's office and the county judge hear what happened here tonight, with a signed statement already on record." Another rider shifted. Marsh's jaw tightened, sensing the ground shifting under him in a way his money had not prepared him for. "This isn't finished, Mrs. Zhao." "It is finished for tonight," Mei Lin said, "because you are going to turn that horse around and ride back to town, and tomorrow I am going to ride to Ogallala myself and file a formal complaint with the district land office, with copies of my deed and a signed account of this visit, witnessed by Mr. Boone here. I imagine the railroad will be very interested to learn their name has been used to threaten an honest claim." For a long moment nobody moved. The standoff balanced on a knife's edge, and then one of the riders, older than the others, spoke low to Marsh in a tone Mei Lin could not hear, but whose meaning was plain enough in the banker's furious, calculating silence. Marsh looked at her one final moment, at the shotgun steady in her hands, and the man standing solid at her back, and the deed box that meant her claim had teeth, and something in his calculation finally broke in her favor. "You'll regret this," he said, but he was already turning his horse. "I regret a great many things, Mr. Marsh," Mei Lin said to his retreating back, "but standing my ground on my own land will never be one of them." They watched the riders disappear down the road until the hoofbeats faded entirely into the summer night, and only then did Mei Lin let the shotgun drop from where she had held it, her hands finally beginning to shake with the fear she had refused to show him. "You did that," Silas said quietly, "without a single tremor in your voice." "The trembling waited until they left," she admitted. "I am not fearless, Silas. I am only stubborn enough not to let it show at the wrong moment." "That's a finer thing than fearless, if you ask me." The days after the confrontation moved differently than the days before it, and Mei Lin found she was watching Silas with an attention that had little to do with fence lines or feed stores. He had stayed through a threat that most drifters would have ridden away from at first sign of trouble, had stood at her back with nothing but his own 2 hands between her and 4 armed men, and something about that fact had settled into her chest and refused to leave. She rode to Ogallala as promised and filed her complaint with the district land office, her deed and Joseph's original survey paperwork laid out clean and undeniable before a clerk who took her account seriously enough to promise a formal inquiry into Marsh's conduct. It would take months to resolve fully, the clerk warned her. These things always did. But the mere filing of it, the fact that it now existed on record, seemed to work its own quiet magic. Marsh did not return to her gate. His polite offers stopped arriving. Word filtered back through Ruth Calloway at the Mercantile that the bank's dealings with 2 other struggling ranchers in the county had suddenly gone gentler, as though a man who had been caught reaching too far had decided, for the moment, to keep his hands closer to himself. It was a warm evening in early August, the drought finally breaking with the season's first real rain drumming soft against the cabin roof, when Silas found her on the porch watching the water fall on parched ground that had needed it for months. "Ribs healed," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Has been for near 2 weeks now, if I'm honest." "I know," she said. "I've been watching you not favor it." "Then you know I don't have much excuse left to stay." She turned to look at him, rain-cooled air moving between them, and found him watching her with an openness she had not seen since that first morning in the hay, stripped now of all its wariness. "You never needed an excuse, Silas. You only ever needed to want to." "I want to," he said. Simple as that. No poetry in it at all. Just the plain truth of a man who had spent his whole life saying less than he meant, and had finally decided to say enough. "I told you once I'd sleep in the barn and ask for nothing. I find I was wrong about the nothing." "I noticed that some weeks back," Mei Lin said, and when she reached for his hand in the rain-cooled dark, he did not hesitate to take it, his calloused fingers closing around hers with the same steady certainty he had brought to every fence post and every bucket of water thrown against a fire that had tried to take everything from her, and had, in the end, only shown her what she had standing beside her all along. 3 months passed before the district land office finally closed its inquiry, and when the ruling came down, it came down clean and entire in Mei Lin's favor. Everett Marsh, censured formally by the Territorial Banking Commission and quietly removed from his position within the year, his ambitions for her land and half the struggling outfits in the county reduced to nothing more than a cautionary story told over mercantile counters. The herd that had thinned so dangerously during the drought had fattened again on autumn grass, 40 head grown to 53 with a spring of healthy calves, and the grain store stood rebuilt, sturdier than before, its walls raised with Silas's own hands and the help of 2 neighbors who had finally stopped treating her as a curiosity and started treating her as simply Mei Lin Zhao, rancher, same as any other in the county. Silas Boone did not ride on to Cheyenne. He built a second room onto the cabin instead, with lumber bought from Ruth Calloway's Mercantile, and labor that no longer needed to be repaid in anything but what he freely offered. And on a clear October morning, with the leaves gone gold along the creek that ran full again after the summer's drought, Mei Lin Zhao stood in front of the circuit preacher from Ogallala and became Mrs. Boone in a ceremony witnessed by half of Kestrel Hollow, including Ruth Calloway, who cried without any shame at all, and declared afterward that she had known it from the very first Thursday Mei Lin walked into her store with that particular look on her face. The hay in the barn where Silas had first slept sat undisturbed that winter, kept dry and turned regular, not because anyone needed it, but because Mei Lin found she liked walking past it some mornings and remembering the man she had found there with a pitchfork's tines an inch from his ribs, who had asked for nothing and ended up, in the end, giving her everything. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.